Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the speakers, and especially a warm welcome to the audience at home or wherever you're watching this live. Welcome at this event, Biodiverse Cities and Regions Post-COVID. My name is Sandra Doevendans, and I'm a member of the Regional Council in the north of Holland, in the Netherlands. I'm speaking to you live from Amsterdam, where the sun is quite shining. I'm also selected a young politician for the YEP program 2020, and I will be your host this event. We have an online event due to COVID, so I will tell you some house rules later. First, the aim of this event. The aim of the event is to have a discussion on how cities and regions will be transformed to the increasing awareness by citizens and the importance of nature and biodiversity, especially in urban regions, following the COVID-19 lockdown, which has been in many in the EU cities and regions. There will be a welcome speech by the European Committee of the Regions. We have a quick presentation from really interesting panelists, and we have, of course, a Q&A where you as audience can participate in this event. And before we start that, we have a Break the Ice presentation from the European Investment Bank. As I already mentioned, this is an online event, so we have some housekeeping information. First of all, an extra reminder to the speakers that as soon as you will click the microphone button, the camera will switch on. So also for the audience, it will take some seconds before the next speaker can start, because otherwise we may be cutting off another person speaking. We want to have an interactive event. So for participants, if you have any questions to the panelists or other speakers, you can put them in the chat. And we have Roberto Rinaldi, who is moderating the participants' chat. So when we start the Q&A, we will ask the questions, but it's really important for you, if you have a question, to specify to whom your question is addressed. This will help us in the discussion later. The whole event will be recorded and will be live right now, but also placed on the webpage of the event of the European Committee of the Regions. Well, I think I have explained everything, and we can now start the event. First of all, we want to check if you're all still awake with us, because it's 12 o'clock, so maybe you just had lunch or your belly is a little bit trembling already. So let's start with a poll. I want you to allow to connect, and the poll is going to be on the screen about biodiversity in your city or region. So the poll is: during the initial months of the pandemic, did you have the impression that the area you were living or you were working was lacking green areas? You can either answer the question with yes or no, and then we will wait a second for the results to come up. Oh, wow. Almost. Oh, it's a close call. Yes, now the poll is closed, and we can see that 45% of the voters said yes, it's the area lacks the green areas, and 55% of the voters said no, which is really interesting. It's we can talk about that later with the panelists as well. Let's move to the first speaker. It's Roby Biwer. Roby Biwer is a member of the Commission for Environment, Climate Change and Energy at the European Committee of the Regions, where he is also a rapporteur of the core opinion titled Biodiverse Cities and Regions Beyond the 2020 and the UN COP15, and in the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. Roby Biwer, I will give you give you the floor, so you can click the microphone button.
Thank you, dear Sandra. I hope everybody hears me. So, dear fellow speakers and audience, greetings from Luxembourg to you all. I would like to welcome you to this session of the Green Week on Biodiverse Cities and Regions post-COVID-19. The session has been co-organized by the European Committee of the Regions, ICLE and Regions 4. The theme of this year's Green Week, organized by the European Commission, is Nature and Biodiversity. Indeed, the year 2020 was supposed to be the year of biodiversity because of the UN CBD COP15 in China that should have taken place exactly at this time. The COP15 supposed to be equivalent of what has been COP21 in Paris for climate change. Now the global leaders will meet next year, but biodiversity and nature conservation stayed and will stay high in the political agenda of cities and regions after the COVID-19. The pandemic and the lockdown provided the opportunity to reflect on our relationship with nature and biodiversity, especially in cities, due to its profound impact on the lifestyle of EU citizens and the functioning of Europe's regions and cities. The drastic reduction in economic activity, together with a significantly reduced mobility of citizens, have rippled through into the environmental and climate sphere. It emerged a need to rethink this relationship and to change the way we undertake many of these activities that are driving biodiversity loss and the wider ecological crisis, and to weigh up the implications for our economy and society. Citizens can see more clearly that a healthier environment, less traffic, more open public spaces, and nature-based solutions are essential for their well-being. We just saw it in the first poll. Local and regional leaders across Europe have to address these expectations on a better environment characterized by high level of biodiversity and healthy ecosystems at urban, peri-urban, and rural levels. We have therefore already started planning, developing, building, and restoring biodiversity and nature in European cities and regions. So we need to invest in biodiversity protection, conservation, and restoration. This is a strategic investment both in the long term as a preventive measure to future pandemics and epidemics, but also in the short term as a socio-economic recovery measure. In Luxembourg, for example, I am national president of the association Natur en Umwelt, which stands for Nature and Environment in Luxembourg. And I had been for 18 years the president of a project called Sicona, which is an idea that originated in the late 80s to create an association of municipalities to cooperate in the development and implementation of a joint nature conservation policy. We as municipalities wanted to organize the municipal nature conservation in the most efficient and cost-effective way to maintain and develop the native flora and fauna as well as their habitats, being a local contribution to the protection of globally threatened biodiversity. The objectives of Sicona not only focus on conservation and restoration of nature and biodiversity, but also aimed at achieving economy benefits. For example, working with local farmers to produce and consume local, regional, and fair food products, and at increasing the well-being of local population. The project has been running now for more than 30 years and will continue. However, action goes beyond the local level. Action is needed also at European and global level. Last week, we at the Committee of the Regions adopted the opinion on the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Policy Framework. At European level, the Committee of the Regions welcomes and supports the ambitious EU-wide commitments, targets and goals of the EU Green Deal and EU strategy. I'm sure Stefan Leiner will tell us much more about it in a moment. We will also hear about the very interesting projects and initiatives from all over Europe, but we also need to act at the global level, as John Moato from the Scottish Government will explain. So to conclude, policy efforts are taking place at subnational, European and global level. The next challenge is now to address the barriers that make difficult the put into practice of all these policies. But we must act, and we must act now. So let's start tackling it with today's discussion. Thank you for your presence and your listening to all what our panelists will say. Thank you.
So much, Roby Biwer, for this welcome speech. And now we'll give the floor to Stefan Leiner. Stefan Leiner is the head of the unit in the Biodiversity Unit at the DG Environment of the European Commission. He will tell us more about the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. This strategy has been published in May 2020, when Europe was at the core of the pandemic. And it can play a key role for cities and regions' recovery from the important socio-economic consequences of the pandemics. Stefan Leiner, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you very much, Roby, for your introductory remarks. And hello to everybody also from my side. Welcome from the European Commission. First of all, a big thanks to ICLE, to Regions 4, to the Committee of the Regions for organizing this session, which is very important as far as we are concerned, because we think that local authorities, cities, will play a very, very important role in making what we have outlined in our biodiversity strategy as commitments, as actions, a reality on the ground. The strategy that you have already mentioned actually is a response to the dear picture that the scientists have told us that we have on the state of biodiversity and ecosystems in the world and also in Europe. And only those of you who have been following this Green Week, you have seen that even yesterday and the day before, there were some new reports, the State of Nature report, the first European Wild Ecosystem Assessment. They also go in the same direction, that despite the great efforts that are being done locally by those, for example, working in Roby's organization that are supported by life projects, by other restoration and conservation actions, the actions that are happening that are destroying biodiversity are by far overweighing those positive developments, meaning that we are continuing to lose biodiversity. Now, I will not hide from you that there were also some internal discussions when we came up in May of the biodiversity strategy. Well, is this really the right moment when we are in the middle of a major pandemic? And the answer to this question from the Commission President and everybody else involved was clearly yes. Yes, because there is actually a link between the further encroachment on wild nature that is happening and the emergence of zoonotic diseases. So one way to prevent these further spread of these zoonotic diseases is to better protect and restore healthy nature. And also it will be much more important for us to, in order to be resilient against these future pandemics, to also have healthier nature around us. Everybody who was locked in their houses, and I hope that it will not happen again, but there is a risk that it will happen again soon, they have seen how important it is to have nature for your physical and for your mental health. We need nature to survive. And there have been many reports, for example, from the World Economic Forum in Davos, that demonstrated that over half of the world's GDP originates directly from healthy nature. So we need nature not only to preserve and restore it for its own sake, but also for our own future, for the future of our generations. And that's what the strategy is aiming to do. And when you look at the core elements of the strategy, to have more protected areas, to have a EU restoration plan, to create the right enabling environment for the transformative change that is needed, and to play our role in the international context, In all of them, cities can play an important role. And there is actually in the strategy also a specific subject on the urban dimension where we call on cities with more than 20,000 inhabitants to have a green plan, and also to work on implementing a Green City Accord that actually will be launched today. So there is a lot happening, and for example, a lot of the Natura 2000 sites, the European protected areas, are in or around cities. For example, when you look at all the way that you can achieve our restoration objectives, you can use less pesticides, you can create new habitats, you can create biodiverse grasslands and maintain them. So again, here the cities have an important role to play. When you look at the enabling environment, integrating biodiversity and ecosystem in the planning, in the decision making, in other policies, in urban development, you can renovate building in a way that is bad for biodiversity, or in a way that you create nest facilities for bats and swifts, or to create new habitats for pollinators. These are all examples where cities can really make an important contribution to it. And also on the international dimension, there is a new Edinburgh Declaration that was signed that really demonstrates that the local authorities have an important role to play also in helping us getting an ambitious global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this all were just some examples demonstrating how important the subject is we are discussing today. And I certainly very much look forward to the various interventions that are coming up, and wish all of us a nice and entertaining and informative session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen Leiner, for this welcoming speech as well. And I think the main importance of both of the messages is that we have to act now, and that preserving nature is not only important for nature itself, but also for our health. And that's where our panelists will talk about, because we have great panelists. I will introduce them, and then we'll give the floor to one after the other. We have Cheryl Jones-Fur. She's a member of the European Regional Executive Committee, ICLE, and Deputy Lord Mayor of Växjö in Sweden. We have Astrid Eller. She's a city councillor in Copenhagen in Denmark, and also a selected young elected politician for this year's program. We have Anjo Kolunen. She's an environmental coordinator in Lahti, Finland, and that will be the European Green Capital in 2021. We've got John Mowat. He's an international marine biodiversity policymaker for the Scottish government in the United Kingdom. And we have Laura Danilas. She's a city councillor in Tartu, Estonia. They all will give a brief presentations of themselves and on how their city or region or their subnational government reacted to the COVID-19. And in particular, if there's any change within the respect to projects that there has been going on to protect or conserve biodiversity and nature since the pandemic reached their territories. They will answer the question if there are any future actions foreseen related to the EU Biodiversity Strategy and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Policy. So I first will give the floor to Cheryl Jones-Fur. You've got the floor.
Very much for the invitation to speak here today. Thank you, Sandra. I'm Cheryl Jones-Fur. I'm the Deputy Lord Mayor of Vectra Sweden, and I'm a member of ICLE's Regional Executive Committee, and my portfolio includes biodiversity and nature-based solutions. Växjö is a growing municipality in southern Sweden with about 93,000 inhabitants. Our urban population is about 70,000, with the rest of the population living in the surrounding countryside. Our region was one of the last regions in Sweden to be seriously affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. At the end of March, the Swedish government banned all public gatherings and events with more than 50 people. And additional guidelines for risk groups were also implemented. One of these guidelines regulated that everyone over 70 was advised to limit all close contacts with other people. This 70-plus group was also encouraged to socialize outdoors. Now, this regulation on socializing outdoors had consequences for our work with nature and biodiversity in Växjö. During the months since the start of the pandemic, many Swedes have reconnected with nature. Visitor numbers to national parks, to our nature reserves, these have doubled, resulting in an increase in the wear and tear on these areas. In Växjö, we have redirected funds so that we could increase the maintenance on the green areas, and we have not done any cutbacks on any of our ongoing biodiversity projects. The public has become more aware of the importance of green urban spaces, and we have been able to educate visitors to our parks and reserves about the significance of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Regarding our future actions, we will continue with the implementation of our sustainability program that we've just recently submitted, Växjö 2030. And in this program, biodiversity is a very high priority issue. We are also continuing to identify areas rich in biodiversity which are in need of protection, and we will soon adopt our first biodiversity action plan. Protecting nature, investing in the well-being of individuals, and promoting global health are all interconnected. And if we as local governments are successful, we can ensure that our inhabitants prosper in our sustainable cities and regions. For decades, Växjö has emphasized the importance of climate mitigation and nature preservation. We joined the Covenant of Mayors already in 2008, and we now welcome the new EU Biodiversity Strategy, emphasizing the role of local governments. We're also in the process of signing the Edinburgh Declaration for subnational governments, cities, and local authorities on the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that the local governments are crucial to achieving the Global Biodiversity Agenda. Thank you once again for the opportunity to speak here and share a little bit of how we're working with these issues in Växjö.
Very much, Cheryl Jones, for this quick overview about Sweden's actions. I will now give the floor to Astrid Eller, City Councilor for Copenhagen in Denmark, and also a young elected politician for this year's program. Astrid, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be able to speak about this field. Just to say something really shortly about myself. I'm, as you heard, the City Councilor of Copenhagen. I'm part of one of the socialist green parties, and I'm also a student of geography. And what happened in the lockdown, Copenhagen especially, I think, is that everyone became more aware of the scarcity of space. And moving forward from now, and this is what I'm going to talk about in a minute, is we're going to have a much larger focus, I think, on the importance of putting more space out for green areas and taking that space away from other things. So next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So what happened when we got the lockdown was that one of the things that happened, at least, was that when we reopened, the restaurants and the cafes had a really hard time running their businesses because they simply don't have space for enough customers for them to be able to run a proper business. So I made the proposal to take away space from the parked cars on the streets and let them do outdoor serving there. This in and of itself does, however, I think, move the focus of the citizens of Copenhagen in terms of what can the space in the city be used as. I think many people don't think about all of the space that is used by cars. It's just kind of dead space. And a lot of people don't think about what we could use the space for otherwise. And this has actually been a an initiative that has helped economically a lot without costing a lot of money. Next slide. Yes. Another image of this is this area is called Islandsbrygge. It's a bathing area and a park area, and it's very traveled, if you can say that. And we had to put up these squares in these areas and saying there can be no more than 10 people within this square, because so many people were gathering in the same places. And we were seeing this in every green area in Copenhagen. And in the summer, we had to put maximum people in on a lot of the beaches as well. So one of the things that is also pushed is the awareness of the need for new bathing zones, for example, which we just decided after this summer that we need more bathing zones. Next slide, please. So just to tell you something about the space in the city, what you can see here on the right is that 49% of people in Copenhagen use their bike as their main mode of transport to and from work. And what I've shown is that biking areas take up only 8% of the space between the houses in the city, compared to cars, which take up 66% of the space while only delivering 27% of the transport. And this, I think, is really important in terms of where we're moving now. Because what I'm thinking, especially after this crisis, is why don't we close every 5 roads, 1 in every 5 roads, and rip up the concrete and just let it grow? Why isn't every new building in Copenhagen not covered in plants? And I think these are some of the big thoughts that we need to be thinking now after this lockdown, because space is such a scarcity. Next slide, yes. So one of the steps that have already been taken, which I want to share with you, is that at Østerbro, which is one of our boroughs, citizens have just, without even asking the municipality, they're just like taking these small dead areas and organizing around, like one person can get to take care of one of these small areas. And we're trying to spread that out into the whole city now, in conjunction with the Danish Society for Nature Conservation, which we're working on, saying how can we make initiatives where the citizens are taking a much larger space in terms of creating city biodiversity also in the small areas. And last slide. Last slide, please. Sorry. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you was an initiative that we actually started last year, about the edible city, because currently a lot of the trees that we're planting are mainly chosen because they are pretty, but really what we need is also to create habitats for insects and animals, and we also need to create some kind of interaction between people and the green areas. So we're now starting to plant fruit trees, berry bushes, and stuff like that whenever we can. So that's going to be the standard type of tree to be planted, unless there's some safety reason not to. So there's definitely some steps forward, and I think the COVID crisis has mainly shown us something about the importance of allocating space for green areas. Thank you.
So much, Astrid. I will give the floor to Anjo Kulonen. She's an environmental coordinator in Lahti, Finland, and that will be also the European Green Capital in 2021. You've got the floor, Anjo.
Thank you, dear Sandra. Greetings from Lahti, where I work as an environmental coordinator in the section of environmental development in the city of Lahti. To give you some context, Lahti is located in the south of Finland and has roughly 120,000 inhabitants, and we are the European Green Capital for 2021. In Lahti, we are in a lucky position that we actually do have a lot of green. We have white forests and lake areas directly in the backyard of the city, but we also have very much green in the city center. We have a lot of parks, but also a lot of trees, green corners. What happened during the lockdown, all right, when it started, was that similar to what we here already heard from Sweden, the situation made the citizens discover the recreational areas a little outside of the city. And now I'm talking about already established routes or route networks. And the infrastructure that the city had provided in these areas wasn't quite enough for this rush of new people who wanted to actually find some space and endeavor nature again. And in some cases, some of these areas actually even needed to be temporarily closed to ensure adequate social distancing. But also, we really need to consider extending this route network, but also guide the visitors on how to behave in these areas, because there were a lot of people who had not really been outside in the nature, in the wild nature for a while. One of the plans we have, exact plans on these, is a new route network that will be built in right vicinity or direct vicinity of the central hospital of the region. And this will be in collaboration with a research project that actually studies the mental health effects of the forest to the citizens. And now if I quickly shift to the more direct biodiversity protection. At the moment, our city is facing financial difficulties, as probably all the cities in Europe or globally throughout. And the key really is to focus our strength in the ongoing work and plan and increase the number of protected areas and their total cover. We have a lot of areas in the pipeline, but we need to ensure that we have the adequate resources to do this and go on with this work. We also have more targeted already ongoing actions such as protection of rare species and restoration of fragile ecosystems such as urban stream ecosystem, as well as prevention of invasive alien species. And all of this work needs to go on despite of the financial problems. Then on the level of planning or urban planning, we will also continue and even hopefully tighten our collaboration with the local universities and research centers to carry on pilot work on ecological compensation. So when a new residential area, for instance, is planned somewhere, we will take another area where we will compensate for the loss of ecosystem services or biodiversity. And then more perhaps at the political level, we are waiting to see how the National Biodiversity Strategy will evolve and what the National EPAS panel has to say on this. There is a newly established national nature network of communities which will hopefully take a very prominent role to guide the communities on how to put in practice the EU Biodiversity Strategy and the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And how do we, I think we still need some advice on how we do this efficiently and how we tie this into the local decision making to not waste any time. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Aino, for this brief presentation. I will now give the floor to John Muat, International Marine Biodiversity Policy Manager of the Scottish Government. John, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to address the webinar today. In early last year, the Scottish Government decided that we wanted to take a leadership role in the development of the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework on behalf of subnational governments, cities and local authorities. And therefore, together with our partners, including European Committee of the Regions, ICLEI and Regions 4, we've developed the Edinburgh process to gather the views of the subnational constituency and ensure they're included within both the new biodiversity framework and its implementation. Next slide, please. Right from the start of that process, we've been impacted by the effect of COVID, as initially we were aiming to host a 3-day workshop, and that's now changed into a series of online consultations supported by thematic sessions on particular topics that are of importance to subnational and local governments. At the moment, we're just finalising the results of those consultations into an Edinburgh process report, which will present the views of subnational governments, and that will be available shortly. Next slide, please. Another of the key outcomes, and based on one of the online consultations we had, is to update the CBD plan of action for subnational local governments, which was adopted in Aichi, with a new dedicated decision and plan of action to be adopted at COP15 in Kunming. The consultation highlighted the key issues which are outlined on the slide here for subnational and local governments, and at the moment we're just working with our partners to finalise the text of the decision, which we hope will be forwarded on to the subsidiary body and implementation to be discussed by parties. Yeah. Please. Another key output of the Edinburgh Declaration, of the Edinburgh process, is the Edinburgh Declaration. This is a high-level political declaration setting out the aims and wishes for subnational and local governments with regards to the global biodiversity framework. It has 10 commitments and that from local and subnational governments on how they can implement the framework, how they have areas where they have competency, and our ambitions for nature for the next 10 years. It also has 4 specific areas calling for action from parties on ensuring that they take action to achieve the transformative change that's required, to recognise the unique role that subnational local governments have. I think the Committee of the Regions highlighted that in Europe it's enacting 70% of biodiversity legislation, to support the call for a dedicated decision and to establish a multi-stakeholder platform for the implementation of the post-2020 framework that will allow the full participation of subnational governments. The Edinburgh Declaration is open for signature, and I'm glad to hear that some of the other cities or regions participating on the call are already considering signing up. And if you haven't done, please use the QR code on the screen here to access the instructions on how to sign up for the decision on the Scottish Government website. Next slide, please. So I would just encourage, I know many of you already have participated in the Edinburgh process, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to firstly highlight the report and the stepped up decision to your national focal points for the CBD, as they'll be coming forward to the upcoming meetings early next year when COVID allows us to meet again. And if you haven't done so already, I would urge you to consider signing up to the Edinburgh Declaration, because the more subnational local governments and cities we have that sign that, the stronger weight we'll have in the upcoming negotiations on the framework and its agreement at COP15 in Kunming. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for this presentation. And now we'll give the floor to Laura Danilas. She's also a young elected politician for this year's program, and she's a city councillor in Tartu city, Estonia. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. My name is Laura Danilas, and I'm from Estonia. I'm member of Tartu City Council and also member of Committee of Economic Affairs. So Tartu is the second largest city of Estonia, but it is more well known as a smart city that has environmentally friendly vision for the future. So next slide, please. I'm going to introduce you some good projects and initiatives we implemented in Tartu. So the first one is Car-Free Avenue, which was a section of the busy avenue which was converted into a leisure zone. We opened this avenue in July and it lasts until August. So the main reason was to offer people joy and pleasant urban place. And it may become a tradition because there were made approximately 150,000 visits. And it was really very well received by locals and also tourists. And the most important thing about this project was to create a public discussion all over Estonia on the climate change, for example, excessive car ownership and different methods in tackling the issues of building a sustainable future. Next slide, please. So the second thing I would like to highlight is Tartu Organic Community Garden. So as we know, in EU Biodiversity Strategy 2013, one of the goals is to restore degraded ecosystems and land and sea across the whole Europe by increasing organic farming. So this example here is not about farming, rather about gardening, but I think it's an excellent example. So it's created by one non-governmental organization, which is called Tartu Mahed. By now they have 2 gardens, and the first one was actually established already in 2011. And people can buy garden plots there. So city supports, we have really good cooperation between this community and city, because city gives them land, so they can divide it into smaller plots, and people can rent this plot to grow vegetables and different kind of plants. So it also promotes a sustainable way of living. And what happened during the Corona was that the number of members grew exponentially, because people had to cancel their travel plans, and like this virus forced them to do and try something else. So they decided to try gardening. Next slide, please. And the third thing I would like to mention, the third thing is food sharing cupboards. So it was also created already before the Corona, but those became very, very famous during these hectic times. What happened before the Corona actually hit Estonia, where the people were scared that they ran out of food. They bought a lot of food, even too much. And then they realized that they can't eat at all. And they took this food to these cupboards. And actually, the first cupboard was already created in 2019. But yes, those became very popular especially during the Corona time. Actually, this is a citizen initiative. It was opened by citizens, but now they have 3 cupboards. And yeah, the aim is to reduce food waste and also promote a sustainable way of living. And yeah, as I told the people, and catering establishments can take surplus food to give away, and those cupboards, I think those are very good initiatives in our city. So to conclude, next slide, please. I think we will continue with this kind of initiatives, because we have actually just launched the Tartu Climate and Energy Plan 2030. So I think we will continue with this kind of projects and sustainable initiatives. And I think that we have to put more effort on developing your urban areas. I think that's very important, what we saw during this COVID period. And I strongly believe that we have to give back more to the planet than take away. So to fight against loss of biodiversity, we need sustainable human activities. Thank you.
Laura, and thanks to all the speakers. I would like to compliment them on their brief presentation and practical examples who can inspire us all. Now the floor is open for the audience to share their questions with us. You can just put them in the participation chat. And please, like I said before, tell us whom the question is directed to. that will help us in the discussion. But to give you some time and to process all the inspiration you had, first I want to give the floor to Stephen Hart, who is a senior loan officer in charge of the natural capital financing facility at the European Investment Bank, and he will break the ice for us by telling us a little bit more about the financial opportunities that exist for cities, regions, and subnational governments to finance any biodiversity actions. So, Stephen, I will give you the floor.
Thanks a lot. So, if we just bring up the first slide, yeah. So I'm Stephen Hart. I work at the European Investment Bank. I used to be an engineer. Now I work in finance, specializing in biodiversity and nature-based climate adaptation. So I'm supposed to give you a kind of pep talk here. Now, the NCFF was set up by the European Commission and the EIB with one purpose, really, which was to test the feasibility of business models for repayable finance for biodiversity. Now, that might sound a bit theoretical, but this is about autonomy, scalability, less dependence, you might say, on public budgets, finding champions who are willing to develop things in their communities together with their cities. And we have now 5 years, you might say, behind us, and we have some stories to tell. So I tried to convey some of the lessons anyway. So next slide. Right, now, just a few facts. I mean, what the NCFF does today is we provide loans that can be to cities or enterprises. It also provides technical assistance, actually, for project development and, say, monitoring of projects. Let me get into the substance. So next slide. So to most people, the idea of nature as an investable thing is rather alien. Now, I've listed a few categories here. I won't go through all of them, but I'd like to just pick out two, which are relevant, I think, today. When you look at the level of spending, you might say, that goes into nature today, it pales into significance, say, with other sectors. You find that people are perfectly willing to pay for sanitation, safe roads, safe air travel, safe education, a good pension. And yet, when it comes to things like nature that, in fact, underwrite all these things, all our public infrastructure effectively rests on ecosystems. We're blind to it. And in a way today, this area is not regulated in the way you might say ordinary infrastructure is. If you think about nature as infrastructure, it becomes an investable object the same way that roads are or the safe water are. If you look at how much, say, spending, say, in capital expenditure, if you look at, for example, what people pay, citizens pay annually, say, for sanitation, also in the environmental sector, these are staggering figures. If only we got close to these figures for nature, we'd be pretty safe. The other, say, dimension of this, another kind of category of investment, is nature as something that we need to experience. This is not a nice to have. Science has proven again and again that human beings need to be close to nature. It's good for the soul, it's good for, you might say, our well-being, but fundamentally, we as biological entities need to be in contact with nature to grow and to develop in a healthy way. And in fact, that makes things like ecotourism not a nice to have, or education in nature, essential. I'll just move on to the next slide. Now, the projects that we looked at, they're all, in a way, created by people, by champions. They can be in the local authorities, they can be private individuals. And today, you might look at the main sectors with the highest financing volumes that we see are, in fact, sustainable forestry. Now, forests, as we know, are some of the most important habitats for nature, and you have an existing business model which you can then shift in the direction of something that is more pro biodiversity, and nature-based solutions. This is definitely on the rise. And what we find is that most public sector promoters can be convinced in a way to do better or to differently to translate, you might say, higher plans that they have, spatial plans or resilience plans, and to translate them into solutions that are, say, more green than grey. But none of these sectors, I would say, are exempt from, say, close scrutiny. We always have to be very vigilant that we are truly creating biodiversity impacts. So, next slide. So making it happen. As I mentioned, all the projects that we deal with effectively start with some kind of vision and usually a local interest, a local champion. Now, it's easy to think of these things sometimes as a financing problem. But in the first instance, what we're trying to prove is a need. And the benefits, the co-benefits, to understand, you might say, the local trade-offs, how to address difficult questions. And some of the most difficult questions we have are around space. You know, one of the recurrent issues that we face in Europe when we try to do something for nature is just finding the space or finding the ability to connect nature with other nature. And that really brings us back to the heart of the problem in Europe. You know, we really need to deal with these difficult issues at a local level with national help if we can. But this is a point of leverage for citizens and local authorities. This is exactly where they can play a role. It's to discuss these local trade-offs and really to try to exploit the space that exists. Next slide. Now, just probably a few examples. We have plenty of examples that you can always peruse now after the conference. You can download this PowerPoint. But what is interesting is that almost all of the business cases that we have these co-benefits, and always a very strong local interest. Carbon offsets are becoming an opportunity, but we mustn't be blind to the fact that we must always think about how these opportunities also become benefits for the local population. We can't have a financialized attitude purely to carbon. We must always see how we translate, say, the carbon opportunities, say offsets, into long-term benefits and long-term livelihoods. So next slide. I mentioned forestry as a key sector. Certainly forestry can be done in a number of different ways, you might say. There's a huge movement now also from the EU to make forests really something at the heart of the biodiversity, say, agenda. One of the things that we see is that many supply chains are affected by risks, fire risks, flood risks, natural hazards that we know are climate correlated and disease correlated. And again, natural methods of managing forestry or forestry have really the potential to reduce these risks. And we see a lot more interest now also from the corporate sector. But local authorities, especially in fire-prone areas, have a huge interest in managing these risks better and engaging with the private sector for this. Next slide.
John, could you conclude? Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, just finally, in this context, regulated business models are at the heart of this too. This is cities and utilities, where if you have a good idea, you have the tax and the user fee models that you can use. So this is also a point where you can intervene. Yeah, so I'm finished.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Sorry, we only have 1 hour and we have 6 minutes left, and we ask the audience to participate in this event. So I have some questions. The first question is for Roby, Biwer, and Stephen Leiner from Paula Silva. The Covenant of Mayors for Energy and Climate has been quite accepted, good and transparent voluntary mechanism for cities and municipalities to engage climate action. Do you think such an initiative could be put in place for biodiversity action with the support from the Commission? So this question is, first I give the floor to Roby Biwer. Please be short and powerful in your statements, and afterwards Stefan Leiner. Roby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. I already answered to the question, saying that I for a long time was advocating for extending the Covenant of Mayors on climate change also to the biodiversity policy, and we are now launching, and as Committee of the Regions, strongly supporting the launching of the Commission's Green City Accord. So I think that Stefan is best place to give some further details on it.
Much. Stefan, some extra information.
I don't think we have the time to really complete with the detailed information. What I will do, I will put in the chat the link to the webpage where you can have more information on the Green City Accord, which is actually launched right now. So there is a parallel event to this one in the framework of the European Week of Regions and Cities, where there is the formal launch of this new Green City Accord, which also have commitments that the cities who want to take part can sign, and then they will take part in this. And this addresses a range of environmental issues, including biodiversity, greening spaces, doing something for pollinators, etc. So I will put the link in the chat and invite you to have a look at it. Thank you
so much. Yeah, time is really flying by, and it's really an interesting discussion. We have one question from Leonard Barocco to Laura. Laura, what would you like to recommend to citizens that want to make and see a local change, but know that their local leaders will not pay attention to them? Laura, could you give a brief and short answer, please?
So thank you for the question. I believe that the key factor here is having a community. You know, there's difference if there's one person or like a bigger community. So I think in order to implement your ideas, it's important to have a local your strong local community. And also what we have implemented in Tartu is participative budgeting. So for example, in your community, you can also develop this kind of idea. It means that 1% of the subsequent year's investment budget is decided by the citizens where they want to use it. So if they have some kind of solutions for fight against loss of biodiversity, we can implement this kind of things in our city if those will be selected by the other citizens and will be winning ideas. So I suggest those two things.
Laura, for this brief answer. Unfortunately, we can't go back to the answers of the panelists on the poll we had in the beginning of this event because we're almost out of time. But I would like to give the floor to Roby Biwer to give a really short and powerful final remarks on this event. And then I will be back with you to have some final words. Roby, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra, and all speakers. Tried to stick to a few minutes, but I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. Citizens can see now more clearly that the healthier environment, less traffic, more open public spaces, nature-based solutions, that they are essential for their well-being. So local and regional leaders across Europe have to address these expectations on a better environment characterized by high level of biodiversity, healthy ecosystems at urban, peri-urban and rural areas. So today we listen to some of these actors who are already responding to such citizens' expectations, and we heard concrete projects and initiatives from across Europe with a special, you permit a special welcoming word to Scottish colleagues who produced the Edinburgh Declaration. And just to be short, I wanted to pick out one important message I heard today is that we agree all on education of our population as an important item. And I think that for me, awareness raising and sensibilization of our populations, our citizens, it's a crucial item that we as locally elected people have a high interest to invest quite a lot of energy in these directions. Difficulties to the transition to a greener world is, of course, funding, financial resources. The Committee of the Regions has published a study on biodiversity finance, which you can find on our website, and the presentation of Stefan Hart from the European Investment Bank, I hope, clarified some questions. Despite the challenges, the different experiences across Europe confirm that investments in biodiversity protection, conservation and restoration a strategic type of investment, both in the long term as a preventive measure to future pandemics and epidemics, but also in the short term as a socio-economic recovery measure. So to conclude, European cities and regions will be transformed due to the increasing awareness by citizens of the importance of nature and biodiversity, especially in urban areas, following the COVID-19 lockdown in many of the EU cities and regions. It is now up to us politicians to take up this challenge. So finally, a great thank you to you, Sandra and Stefan, all the panelists, and I'd like to especially welcome and congratulate the young elected people, and a warm thank you to all of those who listened and intervened. And I wish you a nice afternoon and stay in good health.
Very much, Roby Biwer, and I would like to thank all the speakers and the audience to be in this event. Thank you for your participation. I would like to thank the organizers, the European Committee of the Regions, ECLI and Regions 4, and also thank Roberto for being our our moderator for the technical stuff. I think the most important thing we can take now on is that we have to act now, we have to be creative, and we have to believe that we can change our future into a more greener and healthier environment. Thank you all, stay safe, and have a nice afternoon.